Good morning. It is Saturday, March 27th. And yes or no, that's the answer to a simple question that was put to the CEOs of the big tech firms. We're not talking here about IBM or Intel or Microsoft. We are talking about the social media platforms. We're talking about Google, Facebook, and Twitter. Those are the three gentlemen, the three CEOs that were asked this yes or no question. The lawmakers asked whether their platforms bore some of the responsibility for the riot at the Capitol, and they wanted a yes or no answer to that question. Only Twitter, their CEO Jack Dorsey, replied yes. But he added something about the broader ecosystem, whatever that means. I guess it means there's more to the answer than just a plain yes or no. And then Sundar Pichai, the chief executive of Google, actually the parent company Alphabet, said the company always feels a responsibility, but it is a complex question. Facebook's CEO Mark Zuckerberg said his company was responsible for building effective systems. He also said the rioters and former President Donald Trump should be held accountable. It wasn't the system that caused the riot. The lawmakers widely slammed the platform's approach to false and dangerous content. The three companies have taken steps to curb misinformation, but researchers have shown that it's really not been effective. Lies and misinformation still show up on the platforms. And you can understand why. We have people all over the country using these platforms, all over the world. There's billions of people that use these platforms. And some have nefarious reasons to go out there, like the Russians and the Chinese who interfere with our elections by creating websites that pretend to be Americans and spew misinformation. Doyle, a Democratic representative who had asked the question about their responsibility, said that attack and the movement that motivated it started and was nourished by your platforms. And then they got to COVID-19 and they accused the CEOs of allowing the misinformation associated with that disease to be spewed out over their airwaves. And then Frank Pallone, another Democratic representative, said your business model itself has become the problem and the time for self-regulation is over. It's time we legislate to hold you accountable. And then some of the legislators brought up Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, which protects online platforms from liability over user content. And the Democrats want to make some changes to sections of that law, while the Republicans want to get rid of it altogether. Meanwhile, Zuckerberg, in some written testimony, had said that they could change Section 230, as long as there were some rules that protected the companies if the companies had did what they were supposed to do to ensure that the content on their sites was truthful and unoffensive, etc. But the Republicans were not satisfied with that, mainly because they believe that the sites have been stifling conservative voices. And that's been going on for a long time. So the bottom line was that this was a 5.5-hour meeting. And they were grilled, not on topics of technology, but they were grilled on the harm of misinformation and extremism. But the big takeaway on this meeting was that the lawmakers appear ready to crack down on the loosely regulated tech industry. And tech industry is bad terminology because they're not talking about Microsoft and they're not talking about IBM. They are talking about the communication platforms, Twitter, Instagram, Google, Facebook. They are talking about platforms where billions of people have access and can express their views. So during this meeting, more than a dozen times, the different lawmakers said they were prepared to better regulate the companies even as soon as this year. And from what I've seen of our lawmakers, they will do a shitty job because I don't think half of them, or even 3/4 of them, truly understand the technology that they're talking about. This would be like regulating newspapers and television stations. Of course, one can say that a newspaper and a television station don't spew that much misinformation because they don't have millions or billions of contributors to their platforms. But this is an invasion on free speech, freedom of speech in this country. This is an attack on our First Amendment rights. And I don't know how you could control the general public in this situation and how you could keep extremists from communicating with one another. And one word could be misused by an innocent person and bingo, they're in trouble. This is not a simple problem. This is not as simple as what the lawmakers are trying to make it out to be. This is a monumental issue. And yes, these platforms are dangerous when they're in the hands of the wrong people. It's like a man with an AR-15 in the wrong place at the wrong time. But I have no faith in our lawmakers. I have no faith that they can do the job correctly. I have no faith that anything that's put out there could stop this. And certainly I do not blame these platforms for the riot that took place on January 6th. And I'll tell you something, if you want to watch these platforms, then you have to do something like they did during World War II. You have to have code breakers. You have to have people that are responsible for monitoring what's going on these platforms. And if you want to give that job to the owners of the platform, you better be prepared to give them all the rules and regulations and the specifics. Because this is a dicey situation. You're liable to arrest some grandmother who's sending some message to her grandchildren. This is a difficult problem. And having a 5.5-hour meeting to beat up the owners of these companies just because you're unhappy with what happened to you at the Capitol, when you really should be looking at the true cause of what happened in the Capitol. And I don't have to repeat that because you all know it, even though you won't believe it or you don't want to believe it. So I will leave you with this. These platforms that allow people to communicate with one another have some problems. But the solutions are beyond the people who are trying to solve them. And so I will leave you with that for this morning, and I will see you again tomorrow. Bye.